Santa Cruz, California. The ocean lapped gently against the side of a small boat, its rhythm steady, like the slow, weary breathing of the sea itself. Below the surface, a lone figure drifted past swaying kelp, his dive light sweeping across patches of sand as if searching for the closing lines of a forgotten chapter. Dean Jacobs had long since lost count of how many times he'd dived these waters. Every morning for the past 4 years, he returned to the same stretch of ocean, a place he knew like the back of his hand. Every ridge, every current. This was where his daughter, Sierra, used to train. Where she used to live. Where she used to be. Sierra Jacobs was only 19, a rising star in long-distance swimming, recently tapped for Olympic development programs after a stunning rookie season. But one morning, on what should have been a routine solo swim, she slipped into the water and never returned. No blood, no body. Just silence. The police closed the case after months of fruitless searching. They said she drowned, pulled out to sea by an unpredictable tide. But Dean never believed that. A former Navy diver, he knew the sea, and he knew his daughter even better. Then, one misty December morning, something changed. Dean ventured farther than usual, guided by a pull he couldn't explain. When he surfaced to catch his breath, his eyes landed on a rusted buoy drifting alone in a quiet stretch of open water. Something was strapped to its side. Dean swam closer. His hands trembled as he untied the waterlogged straps. A black box, crusted with salt and sea, slipped into his grip. A GoPro camera. And he recognized it instantly. Not because of the make, but because of the small, weathered sticker on its side. A blue star and 3 fading numbers, 243. Sierra's lucky number. The same sticker she put on every piece of gear she owned. Dean said nothing. He simply stared at the camera, frozen. It felt like a message from the dead, or maybe a doorway to a truth he had never dared to imagine. Dean clung tightly to the buoy, his breath ragged after the long dive. The wind slapped against his cheeks, cold and biting like shards of glass soaked in fog. In his hand, the GoPro camera sat still, like a relic salvaged from the dead. Salt had eaten away at its casing, sea moss clung to the corners, but Dean knew exactly what it was. There was no mistaking it. This was the camera he had given Sierra during the final month before she vanished. "So I can see how you swim," he had told her, and just in case. That last part he hadn't said aloud. But she had understood. She always understood him. His grip tightened slightly, and for a moment, memories he thought buried came flooding back like a tide. Mornings when she'd stand at the water's edge, tugging down her swim goggles, giving him a quick glance before diving into the waves. Days when he followed her at a careful distance in their small boat, watching with pride and quiet fear. Then came the morning she said, "You don't need to come anymore, Dad. I want to be independent," and he agreed, though his gut clenched like a coiled rope. And then, that morning, the morning everything changed. Sierra swam out like she always did. But that time, she didn't return. Dean gently slipped the GoPro into the waterproof pouch strapped to his side and began the long swim back toward his boat, the Sea Haven. Every stroke sent aches through his aging shoulders, but he moved with a strange momentum, not hope, but something deeper. Instinct honed by years of despair. There's only one force on earth that could drive a father to return, day after day, year after year, to the same stretch of ocean searching for something that might not exist. And that's belief. A belief that something was left unfinished. When he climbed aboard, his longtime friend Glenn, a former lifeguard, was waiting, brows furrowed in concern. Dean said nothing. He simply held out the camera. Glenn's face paled. Then, after a beat, he nodded silently. No questions. They turned the boat toward shore. That afternoon, at the Santa Cruz Police Department, Dean reported everything. Although the case had long been closed, officers treated him with the quiet respect that only time and persistence could earn. Part of it was familiarity. Dean had become a permanent fixture. And part of it was the simple fact that he hadn't given up. The camera was sent to the forensics lab immediately. It was barely holding together, but the memory card, almost impossibly, was intact. The technician worked silently in the small, dim room, lined with machines and flickering monitors. Dean stood behind him, hands gripping the back of the chair. When the first recovered video began to play, Dean's heart nearly stopped. Sierra appeared on the screen, bright-eyed, full of life, wind sweeping her hair back like a flag. She looked straight into the lens and flashed that familiar, wrinkled nose grin. Testing, testing. Perfect spot today. Dean's hands fell to his sides. He nearly dropped to his knees. 4 years had passed, and there she was, alive, radiant, untouched by time. But what froze him to his core was what happened next. A figure moved behind the camera, approaching from the open sea. A male voice spoke, young, casual, and completely unfamiliar. Didn't expect to see anyone else this far out. The footage on screen wavered slightly as Sierra turned her head, her expression shifting from relaxed to alert. From behind the buoy, a young man surfaced, wet hair slicked back, droplets falling from his chin to the sea below. His face remained partially obscured by the water on the lens, revealing only his eyes and a polite smile. "Hey," Sierra said, her breath still steady from training. "Didn't expect anyone else this far out." The man smiled. "Me neither. I'm Evan, just trying to get back in form. Season's starting soon." She nodded, keeping a careful distance. They exchanged a few short lines about swimming, competition, and how Sierra was training for the Olympics. Evan seemed impressed, even admiring. She remained composed, but slightly guarded. Classic Sierra, polite but cautious with strangers. They swam together for a short distance before the footage cut, fading into another scene. The next clip showed only empty water. No Sierra, no Evan. Just ocean, wind, and the shifting sunlight dancing across the waves. A message with no recipient. Dean stared at the screen, breath tight. It felt like something unseen had gripped his chest. Who was Evan? Where had he come from? Why was he out here, on the exact morning Sierra vanished, in the middle of nowhere? And why, after that brief encounter, had Sierra never returned? The technician continued scanning the footage, frame by frame, magnifying key moments. In the distance, toward the end of one clip, something moved, small, blurry, but unmistakably a boat cutting across the horizon. Dean leaned in. "Wait! Stop it right there!" Despite the distortion from salt water on the lens, a logo came into view. A sleek, blue wave above the faint lettering, Pacific Elite Charters. Dean froze. In 4 years, he'd seen hundreds of boats on the sea. But that logo, he had seen it recently. Very recently. The technician took note. "I'll forward this to the Coast Guard and try to enhance the logo. If we're lucky, we can identify the vessel." "Do you recognize the name?" Dean nodded slowly. "Yeah. They've sponsored a few swimmers at events in San Diego. Had a booth at the sports center." He paused. "And this weekend, they're scheduled to appear at the Olympic fundraising event at the San Diego Sports Complex. I've been invited to speak." A brief silence passed between them. The technician turned, looking directly at Dean. "You planning to go?" Dean didn't answer, but his eyes, dark and deep like the ocean floor, already had. The main hall of the San Diego Sports Complex glowed with Olympic banners. Red, white, and blue streamers crisscrossed overhead. Framed medals, action shots, and autographs from legendary athletes lined the walls. Reminders that glory in sport came not just from talent, but from blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But for Dean Jacobs, none of that mattered. He didn't come here to give a speech. He came for a boat and a name. Pacific Elite Charters had a modest booth tucked behind the main stage. A polished table held glossy brochures, a scale model of a training vessel, and 2 men in matching ocean blue polos standing behind it, smiling at passers-by. Dean approached with the practiced calm of a seasoned man, a father, a speaker, a presence that drew no suspicion. "Good afternoon, sir," said the older man, his voice smooth and professional. "Interested in our sports training transport services?" Dean nodded slightly. "I've heard your company sponsors quite a few Olympic athletes." "We do," the younger one chimed in, full of enthusiasm. "We provide training boats, equipment, and transportation for teams, mostly along the West Coast." Dean examined the model boat on the table, then asked, casually but pointedly, "Do either of you know someone named Evan who's worked with your company?" A pause. Barely a second, but to Dean, it hung in the air like a dropped heartbeat. "Evan?" The older man repeated, furrowing his brow. "We might have a few associates by that name. Do you have a last name?" Dean pulled out his phone and brought up a photo, a screenshot from Sierra's GoPro, showing the distant boat bearing the Pacific Elite Charters logo. Blurry, but distinct. "Do you know who used this vessel? I'd like information on someone who showed up near my daughter's training route 4 years ago." This time, they couldn't hide it. The younger man stiffened, glancing nervously at his colleague. The older one forced a tight smile, then shook his head slowly. "We're just marketing reps," he said. "We don't handle fleet operations directly. If you need details on our boats, you should contact management at the Santa Marina docks." Dean studied their faces a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. "Thanks." He turned and walked away. Not too fast, not too slow. When he was out of their line of sight, he paused by the refreshment table, glancing discreetly back. The younger rep was on the phone, tugging at his collar like he couldn't breathe. The older one had already begun packing up the booth. Within 3 minutes, both men had folded the display, stuffed it into a large fabric case, and walked briskly out of the venue. Dean didn't return to his seat. Didn't meet with his friends. Didn't deliver the speech printed on the program. He slipped into the side hall and followed them out to the parking lot. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long, sharp shadows. A van bearing the Pacific Elite Charters logo waited by the curb. Dean stayed behind a line of trees, careful not to reveal himself. He watched them load their gear and start the engine. Then, he turned back toward his own vehicle, fired up the engine and fell in behind them. Not too close, not too far. Through the windshield, sunlight split his face into light and shadow. He didn't know where they were going, but he knew. If anyone had touched Sierra, this was the first thread. The Pacific Elite Charters van pulled away from the San Diego Sports Complex, weaving through city traffic before merging onto the coastal highway. Dean Jacobs trailed it at a safe distance, never letting the taillights slip from view. He didn't speak. The only sounds inside his car were the steady hum of the engine and the low sigh of the air conditioning, and beneath that, the rising pulse of something inevitable. They didn't head toward the company's registered marina, nor toward any listed facility or office. Instead, the van drove south, hugging the cliffs that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. To the right, endless sea. To the left, sparse neighborhoods and sun-blasted slopes. There was no practical reason for a sponsored training vessel to take this route at dusk, unless they didn't want to be seen. After nearly 40 minutes, the van turned sharply down a narrow, unmarked road. Overgrown brush swallowed the pavement on both sides. Dean slowed, stopped a few hundred yards back, and continued on foot. Wind gusted off the ocean, cold and briny. In the distance, he saw the outline of several decaying rooftops, a long abandoned dockyard. A nameless marina. Dean crept along the path, ducking behind scrub pine and rusted fishing gear. In the deepening amber light, he spotted them. The 2 men from the van unloading crates onto the dock, where 3 others were already waiting. No one spoke much. Every movement was brisk, intentional, like a plan reaching its final stage. And then came the sound. A boat easing through the waves, too smooth to be commercial, too silent to be ordinary. Dean dropped low behind a stack of old buoys. The approaching vessel wasn't a fishing trawler. It wasn't a training boat either. It was too polished, too quiet, too deliberate. As the lights on board flicked on, he saw 3 men disembark from the cockpit, sun-darkened, sharp-eyed. The others greeted them with nods. One of the newcomers said, loud enough for Dean to hear, "We move fast. The boss is waiting on the yacht." "He's not happy." Dean's breath caught. "Yacht?" Another man gestured offshore. Dean turned his head and saw it, a sleek silhouette hovering near the horizon, its mirrored windows catching the last of the sun like a flare, motionless watching. As he took it in, 2 men from the dock began patrolling the perimeter. Dean ducked beneath a torn tarp, thrown over old engine parts. He held his breath, dead still. One of the patrols passed within feet of him, boots crunching on gravel. Then came another sound. Software fragile. Human. A woman's muffled sob. Not loud, not clear, but real. A man's voice snapped through the air. "Get in the boat!" Heads down, no noise. A girl whispered, "Please. We did everything you asked." "Shut up." "Move!" Footsteps pounded the wooden dock. Hinges creaked. The boat's engine roared to life. Dean didn't dare move. He didn't see Sierra. But his gut twisted. He knew she could be aboard that vessel. As the boat pulled away, two men remained on the dock, speaking low and tense. How the hell did the cops catch wind of this? No idea. They've been safe here for 4 years. Maybe one of the girls talked. Or someone inside slipped. The boss is losing it. Said if we don't clean this up, we'll join those two from last year. At the bottom of the bay. Dean's hands clenched beneath the tarp. Each word etched itself into his mind, puzzle pieces from 4 long years snapping into place. Every unexplained lead, every half-truth, every dead end. When the last vehicle left and silence returned, Dean slipped from hiding, heart pounding. He stepped onto the empty dock and stared out toward the ocean. Then he pulled out his phone and called the one man he could trust. "Lieutenant Spencer, this is Dean Jacobs. I've found them, and you need to act now. There are people still alive." Dean Jacobs raced back to the Santa Cruz Marina, his tires screeching as he turned into the emergency zone. By the time he arrived, night had fallen, but the docks were lit up with floodlights and flashing beacons. Lieutenant Spencer had mobilized a full response team, 2 police patrol boats, 1 U.S. Coast Guard vessel, and a tactical diving unit prepping equipment on deck. "Dean!" Spencer called out as he saw him approaching. "We've got a heading on the yacht. It's moving toward the Channel Islands." Last radar ping showed it just past Santa Rosa. Dean strode to the edge of the pier, chest heaving. "They're moving the girls. I didn't see Sierra, but I heard crying. They're cleaning up, erasing what's left." "We've alerted coastal surveillance," Spencer said, his voice tense. "Looks like a human trafficking route. Dean, I need you to stay back. This is now a federal matter." Dean locked eyes with him. "I know those waters better than anyone in this county. If my daughter's out there, you need me on that boat." Spencer hesitated, but he knew Dean was right. For 4 years, this man had practically redrawn the seafloor with his breath and blood. "You're coming with me on the command boat," Spencer agreed, "but no solo stunts. You follow protocol." "Understood?" Dean nodded. "As long as I get close enough to find her." Engines roared to life. The patrol vessels cut across the dark sea, flanked by a Coast Guard cutter and a helicopter sweeping wide arcs above. On deck, officers checked weapons, strapped on diving gear, and locked in for what could be a full-scale takedown. One officer pointed at the radar screen. "There, the yacht's moving south. Speed increasing. They may have spotted the chopper." "Tactical intercept formation," Spencer ordered. "We hit them before they drop anyone into the water." Dean grabbed a pair of binoculars, scanning the open water. A sleek white shape emerged from the shadows, the yacht racing at full throttle. Alongside it, a smaller boat, likely their transport vessel. At that moment, the helicopter radio crackled. "Yacht accelerating." Multiple individuals spotted on deck, possible female captives in diving gear. "Looks like they're preparing to enter the water." Dean's stomach dropped. "No. If they get into the caves near Santa Rosa, we'll never find them." Spencer turned sharply. "Dive team, stand by for deployment." "Ready?" came the response from the gear deck. Dean stepped back quietly. His eyes flicked to the secondary equipment station. He knew the geography around the Channel Islands like the back of his hand, especially the underwater cave systems the Coast Guard wouldn't even know existed. Without a word, Dean snatched a mask, snorkel, and a set of fins. No oxygen tank. No time. He didn't need to go deep, only in the right direction. No one saw him slip into the sea. In the darkness, he became part of it. A silhouette, lean and weathered, slicing through the water. A father, bone-tired and stone-determined, swimming straight toward the yacht that might hold his daughter. Wind howled across the waves. The moon hung low, its reflection broken by the boat wakes. And Dean Jacobs dove, not to retrieve a body, but to bring someone still alive home. The nighttime water was cold enough to cut skin. Dean Jacobs sliced through the surf like a ghost, rationing every breath. Without an oxygen tank, he had to alternate between short dives and surface gasps, but his old Navy instincts made him faster than the current, sharper than the sonar. The yacht came into view, drifting slowly with the tide as if trying to appear harmless. Dean dove again. In the dim blue beneath the waves, he saw movement. Faint, shadowed, but real. 3 pairs, each a woman handcuffed to a man, being dragged deeper. They weren't drowning. They were being led. Systematically. Deliberately, the rescue dive team had arrived. Combat was breaking out under the surface. One of the kidnappers fired a spear gun, bolts slicing the water like silent death. Dean had no weapons, no gear, no air. But he had one thing the enemy didn't, a reason that couldn't be broken. He dove again, this time toward the faint glow of dive lights ahead. Then, through the haze, he saw her. Sierra. Still conscious. Still fighting. Her wrists bound, her limbs struggling against the drag of a man in full black dive gear with a weapon in hand. Dean surged forward. The kidnapper spotted him, raised the spear gun, but a police diver came in from the flank, seizing the attacker's arm. The shot veered, hissing past Dean's shoulder, missing by inches. Dean reached Sierra. His hands shook as he tried to undo the restraints. No use. Industrial cable ties. Another diver handed him a dive knife, slicing the tether between captor and captive. Sierra was free. For a long, breathless moment, her eyes locked on Dean. Recognition hit, like a current between them, and neither moved. No words, just awe. Then Dean gripped her arm and pointed upward. Sierra nodded, still not believing it was real. Then came the blast. A sudden underwater concussion. One of the air tanks had been hit. Not a full detonation, but enough to rattle them all. Bubbles and shockwaves boiled up in a chaos of limbs and light. Dean turned, one officer down, 2 attackers escaping, dragging another girl. He pushed Sierra upward, signaling, "Go!" Now, she hesitated. He glared at her fiercely. "That's an order." She understood. Dean dove again, lungs screaming. Below, one of the kidnappers hauled a small framed girl with light hair, limp, exhausted. Dean attacked without hesitation. As the man turned, Dean yanked the regulator from his mouth. "Panic!" the man thrashed. Dean wrestled, keeping the spear gun away. A police diver arrived, firing a stun round. Blue-white light lit the dark like lightning. The man went still. Dean handed off the unconscious girl. He floated, drained. His muscles burned. His lungs shriveled. But above, a light, the surface, wavered like a promise just out of reach. Then a hand seized his arm. Sierra, she had come back. Together, father and daughter surged upward, toward lights, toward voices, toward the world that had forgotten them. Hands grabbed them, pulled them from the sea. Dean collapsed on the patrol boat's deck, coughing violently. Sierra crouched beside him, clutching his hand, her tears mixing with seawater on her cheeks. "You found me," he rasped. "I knew you would," she whispered. "I always knew." While the Coast Guard focused their rescue efforts below the waves, the yacht, the true center of this entire operation, drifted quietly a few hundred yards away. No one had noticed that its upper deck was eerily still. The crew had either jumped ship or been captured. But Dean Jacobs noticed. As he clambered onto the rescue vessel, he caught sight of the yacht's bow turning. Subtle, deliberate. It wasn't panicking. It was slipping away. Silent, like a wounded animal slinking into the dark. Dean didn't hesitate. He stood up, legs still trembling, and grabbed a stun gun from a nearby officer. Before anyone could stop him, he dove overboard again. Shouts echoed behind him, but he didn't hear them. He couldn't let the man behind this vanish into the night. Dean swam to the yacht's stern and climbed the emergency ladder. Above him, silence. No footsteps, no voices. Just the low hum of engines and the sterile glow of deck lights. He moved softly across the wet teak planks toward the central cabin. In the dive prep area, he spotted a rack of spear guns, untouched. He grabbed one, checked the line, cocked the trigger. lighter than a real gun, but deadly enough. Just as he turned, a click echoed behind him. "Don't move," a slurred voice ordered. Dean turned slowly. Evan, the same young man from the GoPro footage, now soaked, glassy-eyed, and trembling. A pistol in one hand, a half-empty liquor bottle in the other. "You're her father, aren't you?" Evan said, almost wistful. "I knew it. She used to talk about you." Dean didn't raise the spear gun. "Not yet." "Why?" he asked quietly. "What did you do to my daughter?" Evan sighed, stumbling. "I didn't do anything. I was just the recruiter. That's all I ever was. They told me to find talent, swimmers, athletes with potential. Said they'd train them, give them everything." Dean's fingers tightened. "By locking them in? By stealing 4 years of their lives?" Evan's eyes flickered. "I didn't touch them. I wasn't allowed near them. They were for my father." From the interior hallway, footsteps echoed. A man emerged, older, impeccably dressed in a white shirt, crisp even amid the chaos. Raymond Baxter. Face hard as granite, eyes razor-sharp. He raised a pistol and aimed it directly at Dean. "And you just confessed to the one man who can ruin us," Raymond said, his voice venomous. "You really are as soft as I always feared, Evan." Evan turned toward his father, panic rising. "No, I didn't say anything. I swear." "You've always been weak," Raymond sneered. "Always wanted them to look at you like you were some savior. Pathetic." Dean adjusted his stance slightly, inching his aim. Raymond was faster. "I knew you'd break eventually," he growled. "And you, Dean Jacobs, the fool who couldn't let go." Raymond started to squeeze the trigger. 2 shots rang out. Not 1, 2. Evan shot first. His bullet struck Raymond square between the eyes. The older man collapsed instantly, dead before he hit the floor. At the same moment, Dean's spear gun fired. But without the water's drag, the bolt flew wide, embedding itself in Evan's shoulder. Both men fell. Silence. Complete. Raymond lay sprawled, blood pooling beneath his head. Evan slumped against the wall, hands still clutching the bottle, eyes wide in shock. "I couldn't let him go on," Evan whispered. "He was a monster." Dean pushed himself upright, every muscle screaming. He kicked the gun from Evan's reach and stepped back. From below deck, heavy boots pounded the stairs. Flashlights cut through the shadows. Dean's hands were sticky with blood, his own and others. But he knew. Tonight, the blade had finally turned. The yacht was towed back to harbor under heavy escort, 3 patrol boats and a helicopter keeping it in constant view. Onshore at Santa Cruz Marina, ambulances waited in neat rows under blinding floodlights. As the vessels docked, medics, federal agents, and tactical units moved like clockwork, offloading passengers one by one. Dean Jacobs was rushed to triage the moment his feet hit the pier. His shoulder was bruised, torn open from splintered deckboards, but no one dared separate him from Sierra. She sat beside him, gripping his hand with a quiet ferocity that no one questioned. She still wore her wetsuit, hair matted, her face hollowed by years of captivity. But her eyes, those eyes weren't vacant anymore. They burned with something clearer than memory, proof that her father had kept his word. Inside a temporary medical tent, FBI agents and trauma counselors began gently interviewing the 3 women rescued, Sierra, Camille, and Nadia. Sierra spoke first. "That day," she said, her voice steady but low, "Evan swam up to me while I was training. He said he was a former collegiate swimmer. We swam together briefly, then he offered me a ride back to shore. Said his boat was nearby." She paused, closing her eyes. "I was tired. I agreed. I forgot the GoPro was still recording. That boat never returned to shore," she continued. "It turned out to sea. He injected something into my arm. When I woke up, I was in a locked room. No windows, cold. I wasn't alone." Camille picked up the story, her French accent trembling. "They held us in a private estate near Santa Rosa, a lake in the back. Every day we trained, swimming, running, forced diets. They said they were turning us into champions. If we resisted, we disappeared." Nadia, silent until now, spoke one line. "2 girls tried to escape before me. We never saw them again." Sierra squeezed her father's hand. "They filmed everything. Training sessions. Assessments. They uploaded the footage to the dark web. Rich men bid for exclusive coaching rights. Some paid to monitor us remotely. Their names never appeared. Lieutenant Spencer listened grimly. We've found fragments of that footage on encrypted hard drives from the yacht. Also crypto transaction logs. It looks like Raymond Baxter wasn't just trafficking women. He was auctioning athletes under the guise of elite international training. Another officer added, his son, Evan, is in custody. He's receiving medical care. Claims his father orchestrated everything and that he was only a recruiter. Shows signs of mental instability. May face charges pending psychiatric evaluation. Dean said nothing. He only looked at Sierra. She tilted her head, voice barely a whisper. I didn't die, Dad. But there were days I thought I had. He held her hand tighter. There were days, he replied hoarsely, when I thought the same. But I never accepted it. A nurse entered gently. Mr. Jacobs, we need to prep you for surgery. That shoulder's getting infected. Sierra stood immediately. I'll go with him. You need rest too, the doctor said softly. Psych eval comes first. He'll be okay, that's a promise. Dean was wheeled toward the surgical tent. As he passed Sierra, he turned his head, eyes glistening. If it weren't for that GoPro... She nodded, tears in her eyes. I thought I left it behind forever. Number, it's what brought us back. And for the first time in 4 years, beneath the white lights of a makeshift hospital, father and daughter cried, not for what they lost, but for what they survived. 3 months later, the sky above Santa Cruz was cloudless, almost indifferent, as if pain had never touched this place. But Dean Jacobs knew better. Some battles don't leave scars on the skin. They carve themselves into the mind, forever. He had recovered from surgery. The wound in his shoulder hadn't broken him, though it left his right arm permanently weaker. Sierra, too, was healing. She'd returned to the pool, not to train for gold, but to reclaim her body as her own. Today, the two of them stood side by side at a small memorial near the coastline. A gathering to honor the victims still missing from Raymond Baxter's trafficking network. 9 women had been confirmed taken. Only 3 were rescued. There are questions we'll never answer, Sierra said into the microphone. Why me? Why them? Why do people use the word training to justify control, confinement, and the quiet murder of our identities? She paused, glancing toward her father. But there are also people who don't need a reason to believe. They just do. They search. They don't stop. Not even when the world tells them to. Dean sat in the front row, silent. His eyes held pride and cracks that would never mend. He didn't need Sierra to be a champion. He just needed her to live. And she had, in a way no one could have imagined. After the ceremony, an FBI agent approached Dean with a manila folder. We've just finished processing Baxter's remaining properties. In the basement of his estate, we found a fully soundproof training chamber. Maps, journals, and files, all tracking female athletes across the country. Dean flipped through the pages. His expression didn't change. On the list were both unknown names and several prominent ones, women who vanished, never previously connected to Baxter. We believe he had help, the agent said. People inside sports funding networks. This is just the beginning. Dean gave a slow nod. Nothing surprised him anymore. A few days later, Dean drove Sierra out to Blue Water Beach, the same place he had last seen her dive in, never to return. She stepped into the ocean again, quietly, cautiously. No crowds, no clocks, no stopwatch ticking behind her. Dean sat on the deck of the small boat, just like before, watching. Sunlight poured over her shoulders, turning the waves into gold. She wasn't swimming to win this time. She was swimming to come back to herself. When Sierra turned around, she smiled. And for the first time in 4 years, it was real. Dean raised a hand in return. In his other hand, he held something small. Her old GoPro, now repaired, wiped clean, and empty. He wouldn't need it anymore. Because this time, he wasn't filming to remember or to search. This time, his daughter was already home,